it was. And so in terms of the patients, the longer it went on, the worse the patient's condition was when we got them, because they've been trapped for a long time, and there's a lot of complications that go with being trapped.
My role on the February earthquake immediately was to go into town, and there was a search basically organised for all the streets, initially the streets in town, and we would go around, call and search easily accessible places to try and get those surface casualties who were just distraught, didn't know what to do, or they were lightly trapped. So it's all about getting the maximum number of people out of the danger area within the minimum amount of time, and that just went all through the night essentially.
I think one of the harder things about patients was a lot of the patients were young, because that's who works in the CBD. So people, teens up to sort of 50s or 60s. And it's an age bracket, to see the vast majority of your patients in those age brackets. To be so strong.
That was really crazy, and I'd never seen anything like that before. It was dark that night. It was quite cold. The buildings, there was just rubble everywhere. There was actually a lot of noise, but it was amazing how much of town was full of sirens. Actually, it was just the echo of sirens and dust, and it was quite eerie.
And then I realised that I was actually standing on the floor, and there was people underneath me. Yeah. Basically, the staircase had collapsed. And so there was a small gap between the staircase, which must have been a door, into the bottom floor. Yeah. And I could hear this guy's voice through there, and the guy finally put his hand through, so he obviously could move around a bit underneath there. And so we, after some grovelling around, got him out, and he was pretty lucky. He kind of he dislocated his hip, so it was kind of and. So we just had to kind of stabilise him and then carry him out.
For the first 7 days, I probably didn't get out of there. Yeah. I remember one day where the wind got up in town, and everyone was told to clear out of town because the wind was basically sending buildings over, and there was just windows falling out. But we'd started searching a particular group of piles where there were perhaps some deceased in, and we had a lot of resources there. So we had diggers and police dogs and all sorts of things, and so that particular evening we decided to stay until it got dark, just because it was going to be hard to get all those resources back together again. And we were all crouched by our vehicles, and the wind was blustering down the streets, and the windows are falling out, and the parapets are falling off, and the dust is, and you're crouching down, sort of staying close to something that's big and going to protect you. So there were moments there where you've just got to be really aware. Yeah. And there's lots of
at the hairdresser. Old hairdressers on Hyland in Manchester, a young guy, always in his teens, he must have gone to a hardware store and bought up a lot of work gloves and dust masks and things, and was just randomly handing them out to us, which I thought was pretty. I was like, hang on a minute, what's going on? This guy's, and so things like that were pretty amazing, and because he'd obviously just gone out of his way, spent his money, and done this thing which he may not have been able to help physically or whatever, but he's doing it in that regard, so it was pretty cool.
When I was in a building when they turned the power off, I wasn't notified the power was going off in the central city, and the result of the power going off was not just the lights went off, but the doors all closed, automatically closed and everything like that. I was like, this was right at the start, and I was like, oh no, I just looked at my buddy and went, this is great. However, I now know that doors have a backup system that when you're coming from the inside out, they still open. So I was able to just walk back out. Excellent.
I'm allowed to tell you this. Yeah. So when people are really badly injured, we use blood if they've lost lots of blood and stuff. And so matching, you take a blood sample and that goes to the lab, and the lab's really clever at making sure that it's all okay. And blood bank is with our pathology services, and most of the pathology services are across the road in another place, except blood bank, which is on our lower ground floor. And so when all the alarms and that went, there's a system where everyone gets checked off and that, and blood bank aren't on the hospital system because they're associated with pathology services, so no one checked on them because they didn't know, and they were right down on the lower ground floor where there's no windows, and they were right next to the tunnel that goes through under the road, and the tunnel collapsed, and so they were right next door to that, and so the alarms were screaming, it was pitch black, and they were in there working, trying to give us blood for all these injured patients. They were an all-woman staff, and most of the time they were in pitch blackness. Occasionally they had a couple of headlamps that people took down to them, but often they'd have to give up one of those when one of the students would run down to get blood for us, so the students could see the way back. And they managed to get their hands on a couple of hard hats. And then partway through the night, with all the aftershocks, they then flooded. So they flooded up to about between knee and thigh depth, and they continued to work in there and give us blood all night. So all night, all overnight, and that's the conditions they were working in. Can you imagine that?
That's incredible.
It's insane, isn't it? You know, and yet they did.
All night.
Yeah, they did. Yeah, they did. They stayed, and they were all women, so tough.
Where'd you learn to be so strong?
And I think, you know, obviously other stories I've heard and that happened quite, you know, simultaneously around the city, and so I think, you know, in that regard it was pretty neat to be part of that.
We learned a heap of lessons. We would always take as much gear as we could in, because in case something happened, we've got all the stuff we need. Well, we learned pretty quickly. Now we take the minimum out.
Absolutely, and that's easily for me the best thing that's come out of the earthquake, you know, is that sort of camaraderie and people actually looking after each other, which is cool. And not just Christchurch. I mean, I felt very much like anyone you knew, and even anyone you didn't know, was just wanted to help you, you know, and do whatever they could to make it easier for you. And that's the essence of life, really. That sort of support and families and friends and people looking after each other.
Sure, one day you'll make it there. The star is shining bright.